Hi, good morning everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm really excited to do this video because we're going to talk about the 2025 Jeep Gladiator, and if you're looking at buying a Jeep, we're also going to talk about the older Jeep Gladiators from 2020 on up, and really the story of how I ended up with my Jeep Gladiator, and that's kind of funny in itself. But we'll go through some of the specs. By all means, I'm no expert in all the different trim packages, the different models, different gear ratios, the different tires. There's lots that go into these Jeeps. But I'll give you kind of my perspective and a little bit of research that I've done when I was looking at my Willys. And I'll also leave you off with some tips of things I didn't know that I wish I did know when I bought my Jeep. So back in 2023, I had a sedan Honda Civic that was working great going to and from work. But I wanted to upgrade to a midsize pickup truck for the utility aspect, and I was really looking at the Toyota Tacoma. My brother-in-law got a Toyota Tacoma, and I sat in it, and as a taller guy, I just didn't like the way my feet sat in the Tacoma. The seating position wasn't great. I actually felt like I was sitting back in my sedan, which was one of the biggest gripes that I had. Your feet were straight to the pedals, and I wanted to sit more upright. And so unfortunately, the Toyota Tacoma, which is what I've been looking at pretty much my entire time, was off the books. So I opened up my parameters and I searched mid-size pickup trucks. And I did some YouTube videos, and I looked at Scotty online on YouTube, and I looked at a bunch of different folks and their perspectives. And honestly, the Nissan Frontier was at the top of my list. Right around December of 2023, a year ago this time, I was looking at those year-end sales. And a great resource that I found online that there's tons of YouTube content that they put out is caredge.com. I've got a link in my description if you want to check them out and their channel. But it was just really good to kind of see what trends were going on and what sort of advice they were giving from a buying perspective of a vehicle. They go over both new and used. I was looking at used vehicles for a more affordable option, and I didn't really want to take that hit of driving a new vehicle off the lot from a financial perspective. When using caredge.com, it was great. I could basically narrow down all of the specifics in the vehicle I wanted. So for me, I wanted a off-road vehicle that was capable right from the get-go. I didn't have to do a ton of modifications. And the Nissan Frontier, the Pro 4X version with the rear lockers, was the obvious pick when I was doing that midsize pickup search. The number one thing that I keyed into was the seating position, and when I did my test drive, I absolutely loved the V6. I loved the seating position. I just liked the truck overall, and so that was my first pick. When the December year-end sales came out, my wife and I hit the ground running pretty hard. We had a decent down payment. We went into a bunch of different Nissan dealers here locally, which had a ton of inventory for 2023 that they were trying to get rid of for the 2024 end models coming in. And honestly, none of them would even budge with us. We even got laughed out of one dealer, and we were there for 5 minutes. They didn't take our contact information. They didn't take any of our stuff down. The guy just didn't want to entertain us, and we're kind of puzzled as to why. With that being said, I was pretty frustrated. I didn't really like the way we were treated, and I didn't really want to give Nissan that business. So we went back to caredge.com, and I was scratching my head. I'd looked at the Nissan and I looked at the Tacoma, and I didn't really look at the Colorado or the Ranger, but I'll be honest with you, when I looked at the Colorado and Ranger prices, they were just way outside of what we wanted to pay. And again, I wanted an off-road capable, so you're always looking at those more higher trim level packages with that rear locker or some sort of additional flare. And honestly, those were way too far out of our price range, and we just didn't want to pull the trigger on something like that. So I was scratching my head. I opened up those parameters, and what's interesting was a Jeep Gladiator that was green popped up locally for us, and I just never considered that. My dad had a Jeep Wrangler back in the 2010 to 2013 timeframe. That thing was a death wobble trap. It had a ton of transmission issues. I'll be honest with you, I think he kind of got a lemon, but that being said, it just left a bad taste in my mouth when it came to Jeep in particular. And so I was very curious to know if they were reliable, what their specs were, what people thought of them now 10 years later in 2023. And so I found Scotty's channel, who goes over all sorts of different vehicles, what he thinks from a mechanic's perspective, what models to stay away from, what specs are good, what are bad. And honestly, he gave the Gladiator a decent review, and I was pretty shocked. And so when I floated that around with a couple folks that know cars and are in the circles that can kind of give you their perspectives, I got pretty good reviews back. A lot of people said that when you do those upgrades and you do them on the cheap, that's when you start to run into a lot of issues. And so of course, every batch of cars, no matter what brand, no matter what model, no matter what you're looking at, they always have their one lemon or two that come through, and you'll hear those stories. But overall, I liked what I was seeing from a Jeep Gladiator perspective. So I opened up that search, we hit that Jeep dealership up, we went across town the next day, and unfortunately, they had just sold the Jeep as we were arriving on the lot. One of the interesting things that I thought was an immediate magnet to the Jeep Gladiator was the fact that they were offering a 6-speed manual transmission. One of the things I didn't like about the Tacoma in particular, and sometimes the Nissan, but I think the reviews were showing that the Nissan was a little bit better, is that they often said those automatic transmissions were gear hunters. They constantly were looking for gears and they were changing and their revolutions per minute at what they were changing at, which is awkward and weird. And me, I've driven a manual transmission ever since I got my first car, so I've always loved the aspect of just continuing to have a manual transmission. And in the 2020 decade here, I didn't really think that was an option. And so when I saw that Jeep Gladiator offered the 6-speed manual, that was my number one thing that attracted me to the Jeep. Now it was a matter of the reliability piece, but it was also a matter of let's go test drive this thing and see if we even like it, right? We showed up to the Jeep dealership and unfortunately they sold that Jeep that we were looking at. We were pretty bummed, but the guy was pretty nice and said, hey, apologize for the sale, but we do have some brand new 2023s that we're trying to get rid of. Do you want to take one out for a test drive and just see if you even like the Jeep to begin with? So we said yes. We jumped in this blue Willy's Gladiator. It was the most basic Willy's available. There was no electronic switches, no electronic windows, no electronic locks, basically nothing. And it was kind of cool because it had nothing in it. And so we were like, this is crazy that they even offer this type of a vehicle that you could upgrade these things. And so we just were going in with an open mind. We jumped in the vehicle and immediately my wife and I loved the way the vehicle handled. It was rugged for sure. It wasn't like driving your normal crossover or SUV or mid-size pickup truck, but we kind of fell in love with that. We loved how you could see the different colors. We fell in love with that. We took it out for a very quick spin. We loved the way that the engine was running. We loved the way that we could change the gears because obviously it's a manual transmission. We fell in love just in general with the whole Jeep. We took it out for a quick spin. We went around 5 to 10 mile drive and we loved the way that the engine had power. The transmission was very easy to manage, and thankfully, my goal is I never want to stall it more than twice when you're driving something the first time. We didn't stall it once. The clutch was very easy to use. I will say the clutch is very different from an older transmission and clutch where you can get manual feedback, where these are electronic in nature. They just kind of catch. And so that was a very big steep learning curve, but it was very easy to learn on. So we loved the Jeep to begin with. When we got back to the Jeep dealership, the guy was negotiating with us, and we were able to negotiate around $10,000 to $13,000 off of it. Unfortunately, it was still out of our price range, and we really wanted to think on it and we didn't want to commit that day. So we left the dealership, and thankfully we did because we found my other Jeep. But we thought over it a couple of days and we decided not to go with that Jeep. But that solidified our decision that we wanted a Jeep Gladiator. And so now the hunt was on. So what I did was I went back to CarEdge. I plugged in all of the things that I liked. I'd done a ton of research after that, watched lots of different YouTube videos like the one I'm making. And I looked at this different type of color and what this one offers and that. And the only thing I can really remember picking up was I wanted a green Jeep and I wanted one with rear lockers. And that was something that my dad, longtime off-roader, was just basically saying, you need to have lockers. Lockers are very important when you're off-roading. And I took that to heart. And that's what I looked at with the Nissan. And I looked at those other models that were really priced out. But like I found with all the Jeep Gladiators that do have lockers straight from factory, they are a little bit more expensive. And unfortunately, that was just outside our price range. So I asked my mechanic brother and I said, hey, the Willys comes with a limited slip differential. When you're just doing the general day-to-day stuff, is that a pretty good system? He looked it up, did his research, and said, absolutely, I would stick with it. If you're really going to go do some crazy off-roading stuff, then yes, you want lockers. For a first-time Jeep off-roader, get the Willys. It's not going to be a problem. The limited slip differential would do you just fine. And sure, later if you get serious with this stuff and you want to upgrade, maybe start looking at the Mojave and Rubicon that come with those lockers standard. Again, another tip I'll talk about at the end of the video. So after we got back from the dealership, I opened up my parameters and my searches, and I searched for basically 4 main criteria. Had to be green. I love the Sarge green. It had to have the manual transmission, of course. Had to have the LED light package, just because my old car that I had just sold, the LEDs were halogen and you could never see anything at night. So I really wanted that LED upgrade. And then the last thing it had to have was the heated seats, heated steering wheel, or the cold weather package. And so I plugged those specific things in. I really preferred to have a hard top, but I didn't want to narrow down my search so far. And so I put that into Car Edge, and I came back with a ton of results. I started whittling them down to get closer to me, and basically one Jeep that I really liked popped up on New Year's Day, and of course the dealership was closed. On January 2nd, I called the dealership, reserved an appointment, and I went out there the next weekend as it was 6 hours away and actually looked at the Jeep, had a check, was ready to pay for it, and we ended up buying the Jeep. That's a whole another story and how we got all that together. If you'd like me to talk about that as a goofy story, put that in the comments. But we got the Jeep and eventually brought it home back to where we are here in Ohio. So once we bought the Jeep and we brought it home, like I said, I didn't really know a whole lot about Jeep Gladiators and the different trim packages. I just knew that with rear lockers, that came pretty standard with the Mojave and the Rubicons. But outside of that, I didn't know anything about gear ratios, tire sizes, the inside features, other than that cold weather package and the LED lights, and obviously the hard top versus soft top. I was pretty much ignorant to all of the other things. When we got home, I looked at the sticker that they got with the Jeep. I looked at it at the dealership, and the features that were on there, I definitely remember reviewing, but it didn't click in my mind. I looked at all the features on the sticker price, and when the individual that purchased it from the factory in 2022, it pretty much had every single extra feature or additional feature minus the leather seats and obviously the lockers. As a Willys, these are the features that I got with the Jeep that I really didn't know I was getting until I actually brought the Jeep home, started scouring forums, posting things on Reddit. And so these are just things that I got with the Jeep that I wasn't even aware of when I purchased it. So these were huge bonuses for me, and we can talk about that in the comments if you have questions, but I really love the fact that we got these features. We got the LED headlights, we got the heated seats, we got the green, of course, we got the 6-speed transmission. We also got the premium sound system, which is the Alpine sound deck. That is awesome. We got the factory tint on all the windows. We got a spray-in bed liner. We got a tonneau cover. And we also got the 4-plug auxiliary switch that comes straight from Jeep and Mopar from the factory. I didn't really think that was necessary, but I'll be honest with you, as a tip I'll share in the future, that was super clutch. In addition to what Jeep offers as those extra features, these were some things that I didn't know were on the Jeep that the owner had added as extra items that I actually really do appreciate. One of them was 3 grill lights up front as just grill markers. They're 3 orange lights. They give it a really cool look. But really one of the biggest things that the Jeep owner before me did was they added a 2.5-inch lift kit from TerraFlex with the Jeep Rubicon shocks as the upgrades. I had no idea. I just thought that the Willys had that type of suspension, and only on research and posting things in Reddit and asking people about what I had did another fellow Jeeper confirm, hey, you have the 2.5-inch TerraFlex lift kit with the Jeep Falcon shocks, and it was a really good system. I was genuinely shocked with this, but really stoked, if you can only imagine. So having owned this Jeep for about a year now, the things that I wish I knew going into buying a Jeep, regardless of what your situation is just knowing the general differences between the different models of Jeep Gladiator. Now, I would recommend you do your research and really figure out what you're looking into and what you want to buy. But the first question you need to ask yourself is, what do you want to do with this Jeep? I find that in a lot of the forums on Reddit, a lot of people ask, what do you want to do with the Jeep? Because it really is your adventure. So with the Willys, you're kind of in the middle of all of their packages. The Mojave and Rubicon really stand out as the really capable off-road vehicles. A lot of people equate the Mojave as doing a lot of sand dune type off-roading, or bajaing as they call it. And then the Rubicon is really kind of equated to rock crawling and being able to be navigable over really hard terrain, but at slower speeds. The Willys is kind of like this more capable off-road vehicle than your general stock Jeep, but it doesn't have those bajaing capabilities or the Rubicon rock crawling capabilities. And the biggest thing that the Willys doesn't offer is that rear and front locker. I didn't know any of this really, except for that the Mojave and the Rubicon came with rear lockers, and the Willys did not. That was pretty much all I knew going into it. So knowing that the Mojave and the Rubicon were more geared for bajaing and rock crawling respectively, that would have been good insight to know just for my gee whiz. But also knowing that the transmissions for the Mojave and the Rubicon are geared differently. Buying a Jeep, I had no idea that gear ratios and re-gearing was even a thing or something to consider, or was a matter in upgrading tire size. So having done that research upfront would have been nice. So one of the big things that a lot of people like to do with the Jeeps is making their tire sizes a little bit bigger. So that way they can navigate over bigger terrain obstacles or more rough terrain. And honestly, it makes the Jeeps look a little bit more aggressive. And that's something that I definitely wanted to do in the future when my tires needed an upgrade. The thing I didn't calculate and why the gear ratios are important, with the Willys, they come standard with the final gear axle ratio of 3.73. I don't really know what that means. I didn't really think it mattered. But when you look at the Rubicons, the Mojaves, and even some of the Willys / Sport Editions that have the max tow packages, they come with the 410 gear ratio. Why that's important in the most layman's way I can think about it, from what I could tell, was that with the bigger gear ratio, the 410 gears, when you upgrade your tire size, what you're not going to sacrifice is that pick up and get go that you have when you press the accelerator. Your engine isn't taxed and your gears aren't as taxed with these bigger tires when you have a small gear ratio like the Willys that I bought. So having to do those upgrades when you get bigger tires wouldn't have been necessary because they would have come with those packages, and I didn't even know that that was a thing to look at. So right now, with my 373 gear ratio, if I want to upgrade to bigger tires, I also need to do a re-gear of my transmission, and that is a big expense in addition to the tire upgrade that I already wanted to do. So keeping that in mind would have been helpful as I looked at those different models. The other thing I want to point out in this gear ratio topic is that the 6-speed manuals pretty much standard come with the 373. Different Willys packages, different sport packages will come with 410 gears depending on what they have on them. But if you're going to look at buying a 6-speed manual transmission, you're going to get that 373. And so that's just an additional cost that you're going to have to factor into later when you want to do those bigger tire upgrades and do the re-gear so that you don't lose that pickup and get go. Instead, you're going to have a dog-ear Jeep. So just keeping that in mind, that's something I wish I knew before I bought this Willys. Another thing I wish I knew was when you're off-roading in a manual transmission, you're going to be using that clutch on and off all the time as you stop and go from obstacles or navigate through the terrain, which is pretty obvious. The one thing I didn't really think about was with this clutch that Jeep has put in their Gladiators, it is very sensitive and does not have a ton of feedback. You're used to pressing down manual clutches that are run by hydraulic pressure, and you can feel that activation or you can feel that depression when you push it in. With these clutches, it doesn't feel like that at all. It just feels like you press it in and at some random point, it starts to activate and then the Jeep starts to take off. As you can imagine, when you're trying to navigate terrain or use finesse to get over an obstacle, you want that feedback so you know exactly where that Jeep is and what type of engine power is being applied when that clutch is activating and when it's not. And so I found that kind of odd and hard to really use in those off-road situations. So knowing that, that would have been another factor in considering the Willys when I bought it. Now, I love the 6-speed manual transmission. It's almost like I want to die on that hill. But I will say, if I were to buy another Jeep Gladiator today, I would likely go with the automatic just because of this specific issue and that I don't get that feedback. Now, there are ways around it. You can buy aftermarket clutches and you can upgrade that clutch plate to be a heavier with more feedback. I've heard in forums and in Reddit that you get good feedback on these aftermarket clutches, but I'll be honest with you, there's also a recall, the 19A recall, and I was aware of that when I bought the Gladiator. This whole clutch issue, in my opinion, is something that I think we should figure out by now. And also just go back to what works. Use that hydraulic pressure. Don't use these electronic clutches, especially when you're building an off-road capable vehicle like the Jeep Gladiator. So in my opinion, that was something that I didn't think about, but I wish I knew or could have tried or considered. And honestly, knowing what I know now, I would go back and buy the automatic. Another thing as just a quick tip that I see from a lot of the forums that you might have already found in your research, if you're considering doing bigger upgrades to the suspension or transmission systems or adding rear lockers, everybody consistently says in forums and on Reddit that for you to buy a Jeep Gladiator at the Willys or Sport model and add those upgrades in later, whether they be specific or not in terms of brands that you're aligned to, they say it's just cheaper to buy the more expensive model Jeep Gladiator from factory that has that rear or front locker or has that upgraded suspension or gear ratio than it is to buy a more basic model like the Sport or Willys and then upgrade it yourself. The math just sides on buying a more expensive factory edition than it is to add in those components yourself, as it's going to be more expensive that way. I haven't really done the math myself, but that seems to be a consistent opinion and consistent theme in all of the forums I've looked into. So if you want to do those upgrades in the future, maybe think about your finance budget and maybe save a little bit more upfront before you buy the Jeep, so that way you can get all of those features. It's actually more cost beneficial for you because you're getting those features and it's cheaper in the long run, even though you have to pay for more expensive Jeep upfront. Finally, one of the things that's not really an upgrade, but it also depends on your adventure style and what you want out of your Jeep, is a hardtop versus soft top. One of the things I really wanted was a hardtop, specifically the paint match Sarge green so that the whole vehicle looked complete, but that was very difficult to find. And so when I found the Jeep I bought, it came with a soft top. Originally, I really was kind of hesitant on whether or not I would like it. There's a lot of road noise with the soft top, and so upgrading to the hardtop that I found on Marketplace was a super clutch move. For me specifically, this vehicle is not only my adventure mobile, but it is also what I take to and from work and we drive around town in when we're running errands and things like that. So cutting out some of that road noise, making it a little bit more comfortable in the vehicle, that hardtop was one of the first upgrades I got off of Facebook Marketplace for a killer deal. As you're considering your build, I would highly recommend, if you want to dissipate some of that road noise, you want to make it more of one of those traditional SUVs in that it does feel like you're within a vehicle and not in a ragtop or convertible vehicle. That hardtop definitely changes the game from that perspective. I would recommend getting a hardtop, plus it allows you to mount things on the roof, put in a carrier, whatever it may be. But a lot of people keep their hard tops and soft tops so that during the warmer summer months they can switch to their soft top for easy convertible, but then during the winter months they swap that hard top on. For me personally, I absolutely love the hard top. The Freedom panels make it easy if you want a big sunroof over the two front seats, and then if it's a rainy day you could obviously throw those back on. The hard top was the easiest upgrade to spend the money on and go get. I would recommend looking at Facebook Marketplace. That's where we found ours. We had to drive 4 hours to go get it, but it was well worth it. And one of the things I want to highlight is the Jeep community is so great. When we got there, the owner that was selling us the hardtop even helped put it on, showed us how to do it, and helped us navigate taking the soft top off, as we'd never done any of this before. So a huge shout out to the Jeep community out there. And finally, one of the tips I want to leave with you is that Jeeps, as you know, are so modular, so easily customizable. And that's something that you may overlook or just think as a standard fact that doesn't really matter, but it really does. As you get your Jeep, you're going to think of it as just another vehicle. After a couple of months, after a couple of adventures, you're really going to see that this vehicle is not only just a vehicle to get you from point A to point B, but you really want to make that point A to point B journey a fun one. And you're going to want to adventure, and you're going to want to do extra things with it. A lot of people joke that Jeeps are money pits and that you keep throwing money into them. But that's the funny thing, is I think the Jeep draws people to that. It makes them want to go have those adventures. And so therefore you need more equipment to go on those adventures. So for us, having a modular vehicle that you can easily throw on a winch, you can easily plug in new lights, you can easily add a bed rack to that, then you can add rooftop tents, other gas cans, whatever accessories you want to add. It's just so easy. And as a guy that is not super mechanically inclined, I know how to turn a wrench, but I'm not super detailed in knowledge on how things work. Having a Jeep Gladiator that's stock from the factory that can take me off-road is very helpful, and I don't have to do a whole lot. But then when I want to do those upgrades, it's very easy for me to learn, but also accomplish the task without having to take it to a shop and expend additional money in paying for labor and then them doing it, and then also not trusting their work. But then also when it breaks down, I have no idea how to fix it. So for me, buying a Jeep that's easily customizable and doesn't take a lot of brain power or has a ton of content out there to show you how to do it is a huge plus. The other thing is, when I talk to a lot of people that have bought those higher trim package levels of Colorados and Rangers and Frontiers and Tacomas that are upwards of $50,000+, we can almost do a lot of the same things with these lower level base model Jeeps just because they're off-road capable and that's what they're designed for. But we didn't have to pay for that extra price. So for me, that was a huge selling point. The Jeep Gladiator is ready to go from factory to tackle the off-road obstacle. Other vehicles, you have to pay for that price. But if you buy that basic model right from the get-go, you can take that thing off-roading. And there's a huge community behind it that will support you doing it. And so that's why I like the Jeep Gladiator that we bought. It came with a ton of extra premium features that I didn't even know about. And honestly, when we've looked at other Jeeps later just to see what they were pricing at, what features were available, we came off with a killer deal. So for me specifically, if you're looking at buying a Jeep Gladiator, do your research, look at the different websites that are out there, definitely hit the forums, ask the questions, find out what's in your price range, but most importantly, know what adventure you're going to want to take it on. And that's okay if that changes afterwards when you buy the Jeep. And having the most knowledge going into buying your Jeep Gladiator is probably the most helpful thing you can do, but recognize that they're super customizable and you can change that after the fact. But we love our Jeep Gladiator. We hope that if you're considering buying one, that you do your research, you find the Jeep that you want, and honestly, be patient, use the websites that are out there, use the services that are available, and you'll be able to find one in no time.